providing revenue guidance at some point in the future, what's kind of the right time to think about, or maybe what are the inputs that you're considering here, post FDA action on DAXI?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect it, post-approval DAXI. I do want to, we have been pretty clear that we will run a preview program where we're going to get this in the right hands and get the right experience. So we're seeking a long-term outcome, not a delivery in the first 1 or 2 quarters here of, commercial results. So to clear the air there, but providing guidance on that, because of some of the factors that Mark talked about, the reopening trade, is there sort of a pent-up demand? Is there not, from a macro level for facial injectable procedures? How are things shaking out, from the RHA and sort of reorder rates? I think it would be premature to sort of give guidance on that. I think that, give it a year or 2 in the market, we're going to be in a good shape to sort of start to give sort of what our expectation is growth on quarter and quarter.
Yep. Okay, great. I guess moving on to DAXI and therapeutics, obviously a lot of progress on this side too. You had the Juniper phase 2 upper limb spasticity data earlier this year, and so maybe just help us think about that phase 3 program. What's driving the confidence moving into phase 3 there, and what are the gating steps to getting that program underway?
Yeah, so as we announced in the phase 2 data for the upper limb spasticity, we had the 500 unit dose that showed statistical significance. We didn't show it on the other doses, but I think a couple things feed into that. One is we obviously have visibility into the different muscles that are injected and sort of how those performed, and so that has sort of built confidence in terms of that result in the different muscle groups. I think also when some of these trials were initiated, we had, I think, less familiarity with kind of the correlation between not necessarily units, but the amount of core neurotoxin. And now that we've done a better job of mapping core neurotoxin and less about units, and looking at that against the historical literature that's out there and what's present in today's practice, we feel very good that we have a pretty good sense for how the product performs in what areas. So the end of phase 2 meeting with the agency will be to sort of really dial that in. It'll come down to sort of, what alignment can we reach on the phase 3 program to move that forward. But we feel like we've got, really good data to inform, a good discussion with the agency. And so then the next step would be to initiate the phase 3 program once we reach that alignment. That's probably a 2022 type of thing.
Okay. And so when that end of phase 2 meeting would be this year or would be next year?
We said end of phase 2 meeting before the end of this year.
Okay, got it.
So we'd have to get that clarity and then ramp up sort of, the trial sites and everything.
Okay. And then I guess on cervical dystonia here, I think we're waiting on the long-term safety data from the Aspen OLS program later this year. So is that really the gating piece to the filing?
It is. It's just a matter of kind of completing the rest of that, data, going through the data analysis, packaging it up, and then putting it in for the submission. And so that will be the last piece to get us. We've said, we expect the completion of that trial to happen in the back half of this year, submission in 2022, and approval in 2023. Okay.
And then maybe just remind us that the commercial opportunity in each case, and then would this need a separate sales force? Is that really, would there be a separate build out there on the therapeutic side, and would there be overlap between those 2 indications so you could get some leverage out of that incremental sales force build?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the appeal for both CD and ULS is there's some concentration around muscle movement disorders and therefore specialists. And so, I mean, our thought is that, we could field a sales force, call it 30 to 60. We still have some more work to dial in kind of what that right number is. But since there's a lot of specialized centers that do this, it's a lot more concentrated than, like something in aesthetics. And so, yes, the sales force that would be, selling CD would be the same one selling ULS and then lower limb spasticity as well. So we do expect that there would be a fair bit of synergies. And, we talked recently about hiring a head of market access who's going to also really help us understand what data will be needed for people to lean in above and or either above and beyond or in lieu of sort of phase 3 data to see, how broadly can we penetrate this market with the data that we'll have when we enter that market. In terms of the sizing, we've said, it's kind of the muscle movement disorder, about $1 billion. Cervical dystonia is about 268 million in the US. That's the end of this 2019 data. And then, the upper limb spasticity data or spasticity data is, almost 500 million. So good, healthy markets. It does tend to be much more heavily weighted in the US, so about 70% of that versus 30% OUS. So we feel we can do a pretty good job of really tapping into that market with a US presence here. And then we'll kind of see where we go next. But we are trying to create some critical mass in the neurology section.
And how do you mentioned this a little bit, but how do you capitalize on the ex-US opportunity here for DAXI? Or again, I'm guessing that's something you guys have already thought about. You're starting to think about more here as you get US kind of up and running. But how are you thinking about the ex-US side of the franchise?
Well, clearly it'll be an important longer-term growth driver. I think given the reimbursement environment and just sort of the pricing of aesthetic cash pay market, this is the most attractive market, both from a size and from a pricing. What's often the case is people will start outside of the US and then come into the US to try and raise ASP. As a result, we want to get our supply chain in line. We want to get sort of everything kind of locked in before we distract our efforts and go outside of the US, where again, prices aren't as good and the infrastructure investment's a little bit more meaningful. So we're making some progress there. We will right size those opportunities or those investments as they come up. And I think on the, for example, on the aesthetic side, our partner Teoxane, where we distribute their product, they're going to be our preferred supplier in Europe, assuming we can kind of come to agreement on terms. I think on the therapeutic side, we need to decide, do we go direct? Do we partner that? Do we partner by indication? And those are all things that we'll sort out as we kind of get into the market here.
Okay, great. Maybe just in the interest of time, last one is on the biosimilar Botox. It sounds like there's been some progress here, with your partner, but maybe just what are next steps and when can we expect to hear more on that front?
Yeah, so the next step is going to be a type 2 meeting with the agency to discuss kind of clinical program requirements in order to kind of get approval. We obviously, through our partnership with them and some discussions with the agency, have a pretty good feel for kind of what we think that's going to look like. We're not at liberty to kind of talk about that, but that will be the next step. And once we get sort of that clarity on kind of what that clinical program looks like, then it'll be to move forward to implement that. And so we're continue to be encouraged by how that program is progressing. It's been a really good partnership with them. We were a little worried, obviously, with sort of the acquisition and merger. Would this be sort of marginalized at all? But it's, all systems continue to be go there.
Yep. And what are the economics again on that program? Like, how does the cost sharing work and revenue side?
Toby, you want to hit that?
Yep. So we'll be getting developmental milestones, regulatory developmental milestones, and we outlined those sort of, there's $70 million remaining under that contract. And then obviously commercial milestones gated to sort of achieving certain sales performance. Right now, we're currently cost sharing the development program with our partner Viatris in a 50-50 way. Most of the expenses are happening on our side, and then we're getting reimbursed on the back end of it, just because of how the stage of the development project at this point in time. And then we'll have a range of royalties dependent on geographies. So in the highest royalty areas, they'll be in your teens. And then in other areas, ex-US, they'll be in the high single digits on products.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mark, Toby, Jessica. Really appreciate the time today, and best of luck with the rest of the year, and stay safe.
Thanks, Terrence.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Terrence.